It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Sir Keir Starmer soon to set down in Washington ahead of perhaps his most consequential challenge yet as Prime Minister. He'll meet Donald Trump, who hosted his first cabinet meeting today, making clear to them in the most direct way who is boss.
Is it your view of your authority that you have the power to call up any one of or all of the people seated at this table and issue orders that they're bound to follow?
Oh, yeah, they'll follow the orders, yes, they will.
Digging in, we see the mineral mining set to secure Donald Trump's financial backing for Ukraine as its president prepares to sign a deal.
It could be about to become critical for Ukraine's security if this is what it takes to lock Donald Trump into supporting Ukraine for the long term.
Also tonight, as Israel buries the young mother and her children killed while held hostage by Hamas, the bodies of another 4 victims should shortly be transferred. An eyewitness report on the suffering of some of the youngest victims of Sudan's civil war. The moment consumers may start to feel the heat over adapting to climate change, the latest advice over homes, cars, and cutting back on meat. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello, good evening. The Prime Minister is crossing the Atlantic tonight on his way to what could be the most consequential visit to an American president by a British leader in recent years. Sir Keir Starmer will take with him his promise to increase defence spending and also to potentially deploy troops to Ukraine. He is just the latest world leader to negotiate what could be a tricky visit to Donald Trump. Just one day later will be Volodymyr Zelenskyy travelling to sign a mineral deal made between Ukraine and the US. Tonight we'll hear a little from Sir Keir's briefing to journalists on his plane, and we'll have more on that minerals deal. But first, Donald Trump held his first cabinet meeting today with his new team, and it was quite a spectacle, as our US correspondent Mark Stone reports.
The headline before the meeting began was that Elon Musk would be there.
Mr. Musk, what's your message to federal employees who you fired?
Not a cabinet member, but in every way, the world's richest man and unelected is such a central part of this presidency. And so in the end, of course, he'd be there. Inside, the critics' lines wrote themselves. He really was the shadowy figure in the corner. The black MAGA hat, his nod to his president's movement.
Thank you, God, for President Trump, Father, for appointing us.
For the first 90 minutes, it was free-flowing. The intention was accessibility, or at least the illusion of that, because this White House is now seeking to control who can report in here. And as always, much of what the president said just wasn't true.
They spent $350 billion, and Europe spent $100 billion. Now, does anybody really think that's fair?
He repeated the claim that America had paid more than Europe to Ukraine, and that Europe's funding is a loan.
The money they spent, they get back. But the money we spent, we don't get back.
But it was how he framed things that was so striking. On the EU.
The European Union's it was formed in order to screw the United States. I mean, look, let's be honest.
On NATO.
NATO you can forget about. I think that's probably the reason the whole thing started.
His answer here was telling.
Is it also your policy that as long as you're president, China will never take Taiwan by force?
I never comment on that. I don't comment on anything because I don't want to ever put myself in that position.
And if the French president thought he'd got somewhere on Monday over the tariff issue, well, maybe not.
We have made a decision. We'll be announcing it very soon, and it'll be 25%, generally speaking, and that'll be on cars and all other things.
The optics of all this were about control and about showing a leader and subordinates in a country built on 3 equal branches of power behind a rule of law.
Is it your view of your authority that you have the power to call up any one of or all of the people seated at this table and issue orders that they're bound to follow?
Oh, yeah, they'll follow the orders, yes, they will.
No exceptions?
No exception. Well, let's see, let me think. Oh, yeah. She'll have an exception. course, no exceptions.
The British Prime Minister arrives here in the hours ahead, and with that cabinet room spectacle, Keir Starmer couldn't have asked for a clearer indication of what he faces here, of the type of government America now has, the type of leader Donald Trump now is. American power and its global clout consolidated in one man and his way. The jeopardy tomorrow will be the news conference, Trump and Starmer free-flowing. Mark Stone, Sky News at the White House.
We heard Donald Trump there talking about Ukraine, and at the meeting he also confirmed that President Zelenskyy will arrive on Friday to sign a deal over Ukraine's mineral wealth. He says it is a huge economic opportunity for both countries that would not commit to protecting Ukraine's security as a result. Our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes has visited one of the mines which will be fuelling the deal.
It would take hundreds of years to extract all the titanium from under Ukraine's soil. The country holds Europe's largest reserves of a mineral used in multiple products, from paint to dental implants. Hardly surprising, Donald Trump wants to profit from Ukraine's wealth of natural resources.
Could there be titanium, like, under our feet?
Dmytro says there is, and he should know. His company has been mining this one site in northwestern Ukraine for 15 years. He says American or any foreign investment in extracting mineral reserves would be welcome.
Наука існує, спеціалісти, професіонали існують.
The expertise is here, the scientists, specialists and skilled professionals. There's no need to bring in an external workforce. What Ukraine lacks right now are investments and advanced technologies, which could be developed through partnerships.
That could become a reality as Washington and Kyiv prepare to sign a minerals deal.
The core of this agreement should be the well-being and protection of the Ukrainian people. They must benefit from it.
We very need answers.
For Ukraine's president, it's also about securing American military support against Russia in return for access to his country's natural resources.
Without future security guarantees, we will not have really just peace, and we will not have really ceasefire, what Trump spoken about. And if we don't have it, nothing will work.
In Washington, though, President Trump is focused on retrieving the hundreds of billions of dollars he claims the US spent supporting Ukraine in its war. But bolstered security could yet be a byproduct.
President Zelenskyy is coming to sign the deal, and it's a great thing. It's a great deal for Ukraine too, because they get us over there, and we're going to be working over there. We'll be on the land, and in that way, there's sort of automatic security, because nobody's going to be messing around with our people.
This new partnership could still collapse, given Kyiv will likely be wanting far stronger security guarantees for its minerals.
This is just one example of Ukraine's vast wealth of natural resources. It's vital for this country's economy, and it could be about to become critical for Ukraine's security if this is what it takes to lock Donald Trump into supporting Ukraine for the long term.
A steep learning curve as this nation adapts to America's new transactional chief. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, northwestern Ukraine.
So Donald Trump looks to be just 2 days away from signing that deal to exploit Ukraine's mineral wealth. Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, has been looking at why it's so important to the new administration.
So why is there all this focus on rare earths, critical minerals? In part, it's because Donald Trump wants to generate a little bit of money in terms of, in return for all of that aid that's been given by the US. But in part, it's because Ukraine has been providing lots of information about potentially exciting minerals they've got under the ground. This is a mineral map of the country. And if we just zoom in here, in particular, there's one place, a deposit here, it's a former Soviet deposit going back to the 1970s, where they say there's a lot of rare earth. Now, rare earths are really important. They're in a suite of elements in the periodic table. They're used in magnets, they're used in military applications, so they matter a lot. And right now, the reason this really matters for the US, right now, most rare earth mining is dominated by China. So that's China in terms of the mining dominating the global supply. When you think about refining those rare earths, so actually getting the rare earth out of the ground is pretty easy. Turning it into something you can use in a magnet or whatever it might be, that's really hard, and China also dominates that 90% of rare earth production. So you can see the attraction here. If the US feels they can get those rare earths in the Ukraine, well, maybe that might solve this. But here's the issue. When you look at how much in the way of rare earths there might be in Ukraine, it doesn't even scratch the surface. This is showing you global reserves of rare earths from China through to Brazil, India, Russia, Vietnam and the US. The US actually has quite a bit of rare earths in the ground, but there's no Ukraine anywhere there, and that's partly because it doesn't really have much, even if you take into account that's resource in the ground, bearing in mind the idea that you can actually get it out of the ground economically. So maybe it's not rare earths, maybe it's other things like lithium. There is quite a big lithium deposit in the central Ukraine belt here. However, big by European standards, but if you put it against other kind of mega lithium reserve countries like Chile, like Australia, like Argentina, and even if you assume the best case scenario for Ukraine, it's still relatively small compared to the rest. It's not game-changing. And again, look at the US. The US has more lithium, considerably more lithium, than most other countries, including Ukraine. So it might well come back to, if the US wants to generate some extra money with these resources, it might come back to traditional stuff like coal. There's a lot of coal in Ukraine, not though as much as there is in America. There's lots of iron ore as well, again, ditto. Titanium, quite a big supply of titanium there as well, and uranium too. So maybe it's the traditional resources that could feed into this fund and might bring back some money, but it will be a long time before you actually see that coming into fruition.
Ed Conway there. Well, let's get more as Sakir flies to the US. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is in Downing Street and David Blevins in Washington. And John, the Prime Minister has been speaking to journalists on the plane. What do we know about what he said?
Well, the Prime Minister's plane is due to touch down in the States in just over an hour from now. The first port of call will be the luxury mansion, which is the British ambassador's residence, Massachusetts Avenue. He'll be briefed on the latest events in Washington by Peter Mandelson, the ambassador. He'll also attend a reception. Now, the Daily Telegraph is reporting that in his talks with the president, he's going to confront him over Ukraine. And the dispute, if there is a dispute, seems to be over what Mr. Sakir calls the backstop, the guarantee, the security guarantee. Now, the Prime Minister will argue that it's so vital to prevent President Putin from coming again, as he'll put it. If there's going to be a ceasefire without a backstop, he'll argue, it'll simply give Putin the opportunity to wait and come again. The Prime Minister has stressed in recent days that he has a good relationship with the Prime Minister, that he wants it to go from strength to strength. He believes he can trust the President in their talks and in their negotiations. And of course, Ukraine will dominate, but there's all those other issues like trade tariffs, the disputes over that, and of course, a potential dispute over the Chagos Island handover. Now, David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, has acknowledged that if President Trump vetoes that deal, it will not go ahead. Is that a sign, perhaps, that the British government is concerned that might happen?
Well, David, we heard from Donald Trump at length again earlier. So how does his messaging differ from what we are likely to hear from Sakir?
Well, I think the scale of the mission faced by the Prime Minister was reflected in the comments made by the President at that remarkable press conference earlier today, because President Trump actually described the Russian President Vladimir Putin as a smart guy who he said would have to concede something, but not the parts of Ukraine he's taken. Bear that in mind when you consider the Prime Minister's coming to push for a transatlantic alliance in the push back against Russian aggression. He also said he was making no commitment statements in terms of US involvement in security in Ukraine. Again, weigh that against the fact that the Prime Minister has already committed to increase defence spending as a representation of his commitment to shared security responsibilities. And he also had very cold words about the European Union and suggested he was about to impose tariffs of 25%. We're also weighing that against the fact that the Prime Minister's coming here hoping for a good trade deal. There's been no shortage of Prime Ministers in Washington over the years, from the hand-holding with Theresa May to President Trump's description of Boris Johnson as Britain's Trump. But in the case of Sir Keir Starmer, I think this really will be a very big test of the special relationship.
John Craig and David Blevins, thanks to both of you. Well, to the Middle East now. Thousands of people lined the streets in Israel today for the funeral of Shiri Bibas and her two young sons, Ariel and Kafir. The three were among those kidnapped by Hamas on October the 7th, 2023, but were killed in captivity in Gaza, with their bodies released last week as part of the ceasefire agreement. The family had become symbols of Israel's calls for the hostages' return. A national outpouring of grief followed the news of their deaths. Our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, reports.
The video of a terrified Shiri Bibas clinging onto her sons as they were dragged into Gaza is one of the defining images of October the 7th and seared into the psyche of the Israeli public. Ariel was just 4 years old, Kafir only 9 months, the youngest hostage taken that day. Thousands lined the roads of southern Israel as their bodies made a final journey this morning. For Israelis, their fate symbolized the cruelty of Hamas, and their deaths are a national tragedy. Mother and boys were buried in one coffin, forever together in death. Their father, Shuri's husband Yarden, was released from Gaza at the beginning of February. Today he struggled to keep back the tears as he said goodbye to his family and asked for their forgiveness.
Ariel, I hope you're not angry with me for failing to protect you properly and for not being there for you. I hope you know I thought about you every day, every minute. I hope you're enjoying paradise. I'm sure you're making all the angels laugh with your silly jokes and impressions.
Sharon Sharabi is still waiting to bury his brother. Yossi was also taken hostage on October the 7th and was killed, quite possibly, by an Israeli airstrike in Gaza. His body is still there.
I think that everyone deserves, at the very least, for their people to bring them back for a proper resting place. If not on their feet and alive, then at least, if that person lost his life, he should be brought back with dignity. He needs to be given the proper respect, to be brought back to his soil, to his land. My commitment, just as I fought for Ellie, I'll fight for Yossi and for all the hostages, until the very last one.
Hamas is expected to return 4 more bodies and without ceremony. Israel will release more than 600 Palestinian prisoners in exchange. It will be the final transfer of the first phase of this ceasefire. But the hostage crisis is far from over. 59 remain in Gaza, and the ceasefire hangs precariously, with no agreement yet to extend it.
Well, Alistair joins me now from Jerusalem. So what news then of this painful return tonight, families who had held out hope for so long?
Well, the transfer is underway. It hasn't happened yet, but I'm told that the Red Cross is making its way to the transfer point in southern Gaza around Rafah. We don't quite know exactly whether they will then take the bodies to the Egyptian side of the border first or directly to the Israelis around the Kerem Shalom crossing right in the south of Gaza. The 4 bodies being brought out this evening to Sahi Idan, Yitzhak El-Garet, Ohad Yahalomi, and the eldest hostage, Shlomo Manzur. The Israelis are sending forensic scientists to the handover site to try and identify the bodies as quick as possible. You'll remember that Shiri Bibas, you saw her funeral in my report. Hamas originally handed over a body that was not her. And so Israel don't trust Hamas, and they want to make the identification of the 4 men as quick as possible tonight. And only once that is done will they start releasing some of the 620 Palestinian prisoners. And assuming that all goes smoothly, then within a few hours, phase 1 of this ceasefire will have effectively come to an end. But phase 2 has not been agreed upon yet. That is still under negotiation. And unless there is an agreement to extend the truce, it is possible that the fighting in Gaza could resume.
Alistair, bringing us up to date from Jerusalem. Thank you. To Sudan now, where fighting has forced the UN Food Agency to pause aid flowing into one of the country's biggest refugee camps. Sudan's military is continuing its efforts to reclaim the capital city, Khartoum, from the paramilitary group, the Rapid Support Forces. Territory is gradually being won, but the cost is heavy. Well, nearly 14 million children in Sudan are in need of humanitarian aid, and it is estimated that 3.7 million children under the age of 5 will suffer from malnutrition this year. Our Africa correspondent, Yusra El-Bahir, reports now on the impact the fighting is having on Sudan's children. And a warning, her report contains distressing images from the start.
A scream of sheer agony from a child tortured by the blast that set her on fire. She cries for her mother, who can't afford to change her soiled bandages. Khadija was burnt as she pulled her daughter out to safety. They survived the shell that hit their home, but have to contend with what it left behind.
I'd rather die than hear her cries. We are so exhausted. I am praying she recovers and one day plays and lives like any other child.
Everywhere we turn, a child is connected to a lifeline. Oxygen, IV drips, consoling tap of a mother, of little help in the disaster of this war.
Children of all ages are bearing the brunt of this war, whether it's sickness, disease, hunger, but also direct combat injuries. And even as the military moves forward and reclaims more territory, it's an entire generation that will have to contend with the horrifying impacts of this conflict.
The number of patients increasing.
The number of patients is increasing.
Increasing, yes.
The reclaiming of territory held by the RSF has flooded this hospital with children cut off from vital care for months.
The total number of patients per day, the casualty, will arrive 150.
Wow. All of them children?
All of them children.
For the mothers who come here, the war is changing their children at every level.
He just won't gain any weight. We check his weight in grams. His older brothers have become violent, obsessed with fighting and naming types of guns.
Girls too are engaging with the rampant militarization, learning drills for a sense of self-defense. The stories of mass rape and sexual slavery at the hands of the RSF take on new meaning as girls break free and share the horror they've faced. Hanadi was only 15 when an RSF fighter forced her into marriage and kept her as a sex slave.
He shot my mother and detained my dad and brother. He'd force me to sleep with him. He'd tie me down to the bed and say I had no choice. Other times, he'd beat me.
When she fell pregnant, she had to fight to keep her baby.
When he found out I was pregnant, he took me to get an abortion. After I refused, he tried to make me miscarry.
Millions of women and children are at the mercy of troops on either side, with the army and RSF both accused of war crimes and recruiting child soldiers. As the battles for control continue, the most vulnerable civilians are constant collateral. More shelling has destroyed another family. 8 people killed in a single strike. 4 of them were children, and the youngest was only 3 years old. 3 3 girls and a boy, says the mortician. I ask him how he feels about these small bodies.
We're grown-ups. We found all we need in the world. But why were they involved? They were innocent.
Their loved ones have come home to find them gone. 8 of them across 3 generations, killed by an RSF shell. She lists the casualties: her mother, her sister, her niece, then is overtaken by grief. And outside, a surviving baby is finally asleep after crying for her missing mother.
This baby is less than a year old, Jihan. Her siblings, mother and grandmother were killed in that strike, and she survived, but the whole neighborhood is rallied around her, knowing full well that this child will spend the rest of their life reckoning with this war.
Here, the youngest are hit the hardest, grappling with inconceivable loss, as those they lean on to survive this war become its latest victims. Yusra al-Bagher, Sky News, Durman.
And sadly, the young girl in Yusra's report, 11-year-old Fardus, who had been suffering with burn injuries, passed away last night. Now, 7 organisations are to be investigated and potentially blacklisted in connection with the 2017 Grenfell disaster, which claimed the lives of 72 people. The Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, has accepted all 58 of the recommendations of the Grenfell Tower Inquiry report, including the creation of a single regulator for the construction industry. The Vatican says Pope Francis has shown further slight improvement in his health and has been able to get up and sit in an armchair today. The 88-year-old has spent almost 2 weeks in hospital and remains in a critical condition with pneumonia in both his lungs. A man has been charged in connection with the death of a 3-year-old girl in Manchester on Saturday. Louisa Parmesana, known as Lulu, was killed after a van and a tram collided and then mounted the pavement. 36-year-old Raoul Remen has been charged with causing death by dangerous driving. Now, only a tiny fraction of us currently own electric cars. Even fewer homes have heat pumps. The scale of the change that will be needed was set out today in the latest official advice to the government from its own climate watchdog. Apart from the mass rollout of those technologies, people will need to eat less meat, 25% less. Our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, has more.
Having the heat sucked out of your home watched by a thermal imaging camera.
I don't think you'd appreciate how much of a draft there is from there. Wow.
Reveals the drafts and cold spots that, multiplied across tens of millions of properties, represent the next front line in tackling climate change. Maria's house in Bristol, like pretty much all the rest in Britain, will need a bit of work before they can ditch their gas boiler for a greener, more efficient heat pump and see it save money in the long run.
I think in terms of, financing it, yeah, there'd need to be some kind of support because it's, I don't have, spare capital to put into just sort of, funding this outright.
The difference between the top and the bottom of the chart on here is...
It's why the latest report from the Committee on Climate Change is its most consequential yet. Few of us noticed the 50% cut in emissions achieved so far, made by phasing out coal and increasing wind and solar power. But cutting the remaining 50% falls largely in and around our homes.
By the late 2030s, heat is important. Warming our homes with zero-carbon electricity is the single most important step to getting to net zero. But the electrifying pace will have to increase both in our homes and beyond.
The 2.8% share of electric cars on the road must rise to 80% by 2040. Average household meat consumption should decline by 25%. Demand for flying increases 10% by 2040 compared to today. The cost of lower carbon jet fuels either going onto tickets or funded through a frequent flyer tax. And all that demand will require 6 times more electricity from offshore wind. But, says the climate watchdog, it will have to get cheaper quickly. Consumers simply won't switch unless it makes life better.
It's not asking you to be colder, not to drive, not to take your holiday. It's saying we expect business and government to work to make these better, modern technologies available to you. And also that means that we help the planet.
Their new advice shows how consumers and the wider economy will benefit from the rapid shift away from fossil fuels mandated by law. But it's a cash-strapped government that must work out how to afford the fixes needed to deliver it. Tom Clark, Sky News, Bristol.
Well, finally, he was a regular guest in this parish in the past, the former television host and Sky News paper reviewer, Henry Kelly, who has died at the age of 78. Yes, the host of shows including Going for Gold passed away peacefully after a period of ill health. Born in Dublin, he began his career at the Irish Times before presenting the hit TV show in the 1980s and 90s. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, joined by the broadcaster and commentator Alex Andreou and the Telegraph's deputy comment editor Annabel Denham. Welcome and great to see both of you. So among the stories, we'll be talking about this on the front of The Guardian. The headline, Starmer to press Trump on security guarantees in those critical Ukraine talks as he's flying to Washington right now. Plenty more on all of that when we come back.
nation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
Yeah. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First of all, our top stories. Keir Starmer has said he trusts Donald Trump, but refused to be drawn on whether the US president is on our side, ahead of a crucial meeting to discuss ending the war in Ukraine. Well, Ukraine has agreed terms with the United States on a crucial minerals deal, a Ukrainian government source has told Sky News. And independent climate advisors have said that 4 in 5 cars should be electric and half of homes should have heat pumps within 15 years to meet the target to be net zero by 2050. Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the broadcaster and commentator Alex Andreou and the Telegraph's deputy comment editor Annabel Denham. Lovely to see both of you and welcome. So as ever, let's take a look, shall we, at the front pages, starting with the Telegraph. Starmer to confront Trump on Ukraine. There's their headline. As Keir Starmer heads to Washington, the Telegraph saying the PM will tell the president that Vladimir Putin will invade Ukraine again unless the US provides protection for a European peacekeeping force. That warning is also the lead story for Thursday's Guardian. The Times says the Prime Minister will tell the President that the USA is needed to hold back Putin. The Daily Mirror puts it starkly, he'll strike again. The Eye says the Prime Minister will tell the US President that if he backs Europe on Ukraine, one of his rewards will be to get to meet the King. The Daily Mail, meanwhile, says that a day after announcing a major increase in defence spending, Labour is billions of pounds on surrendering the Chagos Islands. Apologies. Starmer is set to blow defence billions, rather, on Chagos surrender. Let me read that properly. While a deal on the USA getting access to rare minerals in Ukraine is close, the Metro says that when it comes to actual peace with Russia, it's still a question of deal or no deal. The Financial Times leads with Donald Trump's latest threat of a 25% tariff on EU goods. And the Express has new developments in the case of the missing chef, Claudia Lawrence. And then the Star mocks Donald Trump for sharing an AI-generated video of Gaza featuring a gold statue of himself. Well, let us bring you some breaking news we're getting. Hamas has now handed over 4 bodies to the Red Cross in Gaza. That is according to Israeli security sources telling the Reuters news agency. They are Saki Idan. Mr. Idan's 18-year-old daughter was killed by Hamas at their home at Nahal Oz. He was taken hostage. One of the captors during that process had picked up Saki's wife's phone, asked for her password and began filming the family on Facebook, which they did for some 26 minutes before the attack outside the kibbutz continued, before telling Saki to get up and to drive away. Itzhak Elgarat, another one, he was taken at the age of 68 from Nir Oz too. He'd been shot through a safe room door, injuring him. Ohad Yahal Alomi was taken age 49, also from Nir Oz. He had been engaged in a gun battle with gunmen in his house and was shot in the leg. His wife and 2 children had been able to run. They'd been put on different mopeds. His 12-year-old daughter finally released on November the 27th, back in 2023. And finally, Shlomo Mansour, known as the oldest of those hostages, taken at the age of 85 from Kisufim, a kibbutz where he had fixed cupboards and clocks and tended his garden. He was killed and taken captive on October the 7th, the IDF announced this month. And obviously the transfer of Palestinian prisoners will also happen later on. This is Offa prison, more than 600 Palestinian prisoners. We know there had been disquiet about the propaganda moments, is how the Israelis saw how the hostages had been paraded. This transfer of those 4 bodies happening differently in order to allow the Palestinian prisoners to be released as part of the phase 1 of this ceasefire deal. And this is effectively the end of this phase 1. We will certainly keep an eye on what more pictures we get, but those are the pictures from Offa prison on the West Bank. Well, you're watching our press preview. We are joined by Alex Andreou and Annabel Den, and welcome back to both of you then. So much to discuss. Obviously, Sir Keir Starmer, his big moment in the spotlight in Washington on Thursday. What does he need to do? The newspapers are full of what he will tell Donald Trump, how he will confront him. Perhaps that is not the best tack already.
No, I think effectively what he's going there to do is play for time, get more time for Europe to get its act together. The reason we have seen this hastily arranged announcement on defence spending, it is the equivalent of an offering. You know, it's the equivalent of a gift you take when you go to a new, a sort of a housewarming party almost. So he's going there to say, look, we are moving in the direction you want us to, but we need more time. You have to smooth the curve that you pull out of Europe, as it were. And I think the signs are good for him achieving some delay to that, especially since we are hearing news of Zelenskyy having agreed a deal for the minerals, which is effectively what Trump had been pushing for. I think this front page that we have about warning him that Putin will strike again if he pulls out, we've seen Starmer do that quite a lot in opposition, and it's an interesting technique. You sort of put a marker down that raises the stakes for the other person. It says, how sure are you of that person? We saw him do it with Johnson during Partygate, if you remember. He kept putting these markers down, saying, are you sure about X, Y, and Z? And then these things come back to haunt you if they don't pan out. So I think that's what he's doing. He's saying, are you sure you want to stake your reputation on this man that we know to be unreliable? It's quite a clever technique that is not a direct confrontation, but like I said, it raises the stakes.
Yeah, a subtle challenge, should we call it that, certainly. And yet today, Donald Trump hosting his first cabinet meeting in which they seem to pledge allegiance to their king, effectively. But he also said, or reiterated, what our lies, which is the expenditure, the amount that America has spent on Ukraine, and the fact he's now learnt the Europeans are getting their money back, something Macron actually on Monday corrected him on. It was an extraordinary moment to witness all of this, wasn't it? And he's still not talking about security guarantees, which we've heard from President Macron, and we will no doubt also hear from Sir Keir Starmer, this idea that America has to be the backstop to protect Ukraine should there be some peace agreement with Russia.
Well, I mean, it's been another extraordinary week in geopolitics and
Elon Musk
frenetic time
in this imaging.
Extraordinary.
Extraordinary week and a frenetic time, I think, in international diplomacy, all deriving from Trump's shift in position towards Ukraine, and yes, the suggestion that they would have exposure to some of those rare minerals as payback for the support they provided to Ukraine. But I think, at the moment, I mean, who can ever know what's going through Donald Trump's mind? But we know that one of his end goals is that European NATO members up their defence spending and that they are serious about guaranteeing security across Europe in a way that they haven't been for some time, despite repeated warnings from Donald Trump during the first administration. You asked, Anna, what will Starmer Starmer need to try and achieve when he meets with President Trump tomorrow. And I think in some ways it's very similar to what Macron was able to achieve, which is to be deferential, as Trump would only expect, but to subtly disagree and to really show, as I say, that willingness to provide European security, but also a way of trying to get Trump and his team to take Starmer seriously.
So let's look at The Guardian, picks up that word security guarantees. It really was the one thing that stuck in my mind from President Macron. Starmer to press Trump on security guarantees in these critical Ukraine talks. The Mirror with that other messaging that they'll strike again. You know, do you want to leave it open that Putin feels he can go back into Ukraine, or, you know, elsewhere in Europe is kind of the suggestion from many European leaders.
There's been a tendency, I think, in reports recently to pit Macron against Starmer in this strange competition that he somehow gazumped him by going there on Monday. And, you know, he was able to use his charm to correct Trump, and could Starmer do the same? But it seems to me they are working entirely as a team, as a tag
and have
team.
spoken, we know, don't we?
Yeah, to nudge him in the right direction. So this is what's interesting about it. He's demanding security guarantees. He's demanding that Europe up its spend, but at the same time, he's saying, I'm not that committed to NATO. He's demanding a percentage of GDP that America doesn't spend. Meanwhile, Pete Hegseth announced 8% cuts to America's defense budget today. He has instructed the Pentagon to find $50 billion worth of savings, and is shifting a lot of the current defense infrastructure towards the Pacific. So even if you accepted that you could convince America to be willing to still stay fully involved in Europe, I'm not sure they're there physically. I'm not sure they're there, that's where their head is at. You know, they are very much looking towards China and focusing everything in that direction. And I think this is what has been driving all of that. In effect, Trump has the impression that while they've been busy defending Europe, which is freeloading, which we know is historically illiterate, but while they've been busy defending Europe, China has been getting away with loads of stuff on the other side
South
because
China Sea, airfields,
they're not on them.
Yeah.
And that's the refocus he wants. And that will happen. It's their policy. The question is how quickly.
OK, exactly. The other main issue is tariffs. Yes. Confirmation, it seems, from Donald Trump today that Europe will get clobbered with 25% tariffs. They've made the decision, you know. And the point being is whether Keir Starmer can persuade Donald Trump that the UK is not, you know, seen in the same way.
Well, it isn't seen in the same way at the moment, but who knows what could happen a day or two from now. But 25% tariffs on EU goods would be very punishing for the bloc. Donald Trump has said that, you know, it isn't a level playing field between the US and the EU when it comes to trade. And actually, you know, he's not wrong. The EU sold about £160 billion worth more in goods to the US every year over the last 3 years than it bought. The EU charges 10% tax on US vehicles which are imported, whereas the US charges 2.5%. Now, look, that isn't to suggest that I agree with Trump's decision to slap 25% tariffs on in some sort of warped retaliation. But I find it very surprising. I didn't think this was the sort of thing that he was actually going to push through with. And, you know, the question now is how will European companies, particularly high-tech businesses, pharmaceuticals that are big exporters to the US, how are they going to respond to this?
OK, and just very quickly, the eye, back Europe on Putin, and there you are. You'll have a lovely state visit hosted by King Charles as he tries to convince Trump to maintain support for war-torn Ukraine on this landmark visit and keep the tariffs small. We need to move on. Apologies. Lots happening tonight. Lots to come as well in our programme, including this. Is BP turning its back on green energy? That and more after the break.
Trust in politics is at an all-time low. What's going wrong and can we fix it? It's from Liz. She wants to know, why is there still no sign of the Labour Party electing a woman as leader?
It's sort of embarrassing. You know, it takes a very strong man to be leader, but it takes an even stronger man to support a woman for leader.
If you want to be mean to politicians, like, crack on. The activists that go out and make elections happen, I kind of feel like just don't be horrible to them. Be polite to them in the same way that they're polite to you.
Keir Starmer has got us into government with a big majority. He was completely clear before the election that he wasn't going to be able to do the two-child benefit policy, but I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't an early thing that comes along.
I went up to Gordon Brown and said, hello? No, yes, where is it? I said, found all these Tory candidates breaking land. Let me see it, let me see it. This is brilliant, brilliant.
You are on Sky News. Welcome to the BAFTAs.
I'm Katie Spencer, Sky's arts and entertainment correspondent. And from the BAFTAs to the Brit Awards, the Oscars to the Olivier's, our entertainment team is here interviewing some of the biggest stars in the world.
This is the story of the night. It's the little independent film that could.
Sky News, the full story first, free wherever you get your news.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We start with breaking news.
I am Anna Botting.
It's been quite some day.
The golden age of America begins right now.
A long-awaited ceasefire is now underway.
First question, Sky News.
Congratulations, this is a huge moment.
Describe this feeling. It's incredible. Now to California.
The Democratic mayor of Los Angeles cut the fire department budget. Do you owe citizens an apology? Have you nothing to say today?
Jane Secker, Sky News. Would you like to respond to us now?
I've never seen anything like this.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
In principle, would you agree to do that?
Criticism of you, the president, is banned. How is this a fair election?
Historic day here today.
The cameras are poised here, there, everywhere, waiting to see what the president might do next.
I gave you the A+ treatment. Thank you. Thank you all.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks. I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me once again, Alex Andreou and Annabel Denham. Welcome back to both of you. Chagos Island, shall we? It's on the front page of the Daily Mail, whether money might be used of this defence money, set to blow defence billions on Chagos surrender on the eve of this critical meeting, you know, wrapping it all up together. Lammy suggesting today there will be no agreement without the Americans on side. But I mean, you were saying that was always going to be the case.
It's always the case, and it was the White House pressing for the deal under Biden that pushed it through so quickly. It's because Biden wanted it done and dusted before he left office, but didn't quite manage to do that because it's a joint base. It's a joint base between the UK and the US, and this is basically a deal for its 100-year lease.
I'm not sure that this is the kind of strategic asset that the US is going to want to give up. And I think before Trump's inauguration, we suspected that when he caught wind of what the UK was trying to do, he wouldn't be in favour of it. In terms of Starmer today, yes, he was pressed at PM's Q's about whether this Chagos surrender would contribute to the defence billions. The draft deal reportedly will cost the taxpayer $90 million each year for 99 years, which gets you to about £9 billion over the near century. So they're talking about a lot of money, and obviously that would be very significant if it was being taken away from the armed forces, which are crying out for more investment, and put towards this.
OK, let's head to the Financial Times, shall we? You know, the mood music is a shifting, is it not, in multiple sectors, including in oil and gas, it seems. BP returning to its roots is the story here.
Yes, so about 5 years ago, British Petroleum decided that it would reinvent itself as a green energy company, but ultimately this failed, and there were years of lacklustre returns, and shareholders have been extremely disgruntled, and it's now decided to abandon that and focus on what most would consider to be its core purpose, at least at the moment. And it comes, of course, on the same day that the Climate Change Committee, the Quango, that was set up in 2008 at the same time as the Climate Change Act, to ensure the government is introducing the measures necessary to decarbonise and reach the net zero target. It published its most recent carbon budget, and that also set out sort of some of the measures that may be quite unpopular in a not dissimilar way to what BP's done with shareholders.
In the meantime, drill, baby, drill. There we are. Alex, Annabelle, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. See you for more in the 11. Right now, here's the weather. So as spring approaches, there are quieter days ahead as high pressure begins to build in the south. Whilst this will bring sunnier skies at times, there's also the likelihood of chilly, frosty nights along with patches of fog. Even this morning, there's the potential for some pockets of frost over northern and western areas, a few isolated even coastal showers too. Eastern coasts of England, along with the southeast, will retain enough cloud to remain mostly frost-free. There'll also be some heavy blustery showers over some North Sea coasts. Well, our press preview continues in Sky News at 11. Keir Starmer flying into Washington for that meeting with Donald Trump to discuss Ukraine and no doubt tariffs too. Back in just a moment.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away? Sky News, the full story first.